Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. It's Monday, September 19th. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Is the COVID-19 pandemic over? In an interview, President Joe Biden says that it is, stirring criticism from some health experts. But as Kitty Alvarado reports, the president says the virus is still a problem for those who are not protected.
Johns Hopkins University says more than 12,700 people died of COVID in the U.S. over the last 28 days. But on 60 Minutes on Sunday, President Biden said the pandemic was over. He did say it's still a problem and his administration is doing a lot of work. But then he repeated that it's over. Some health experts say it's not quite that simple.
We shouldn't forget that there are still hundreds of people dying each day across America from COVID, but it is true that we're definitely doing better now than we've done in a very long time. I think it's better to say the situation continues to change.
That's Dr. Cameron Kaiser, the Deputy Public Health Officer of San Diego County. He says that COVID has now shifted to being endemic, meaning the virus is still widespread. The difference, he says, is we have the tools to know how to control it.
COVID is not just the flu and never has been. And however you define a pandemic, we're still going to be struggling with it for a long time.
But now is not the time to forget the lessons learned.
I think a good part of where we are right now is people stepping up, protecting their vulnerable neighbors and coworkers by wearing masks and taking other sensible precautions.
He says a big part of that includes being vaccinated and boosted. And until science on this improves, boosters will need to be updated regularly.
We're starting to move towards a more flu shot-like model where we make these small changes over time, where people can start treating COVID shots like flu shots and that people can have ongoing protection without having to get sick again.
Kaiser says the new booster or bivalent vaccine is available now. Everyone 12 and up is eligible for the Pfizer booster, while those 18 and up can get the Moderna shot.
Everybody should get a new one. If you're a kid under 12, you can still get the old booster if you never got one. But whether you got a whole bunch of boosters before, you never received a single booster in your life, you should still get this one.
Kaiser says we all have to do our part to keep our community safe.
People have thought that endemic means just going back to normal. It's just business as usual. And that's not the case. It just means that it's here to stay.
Kaiser says county testing sites are still open, but may shift because they're state funded and more people are testing at home. Kitty Alvarado, KPBS News.
City of San Diego employees who refused COVID vaccines on religious grounds used to be required to take weekly COVID tests, but no more, says city spokesperson Nicole Darling.
Employees who received medical or religious exemptions from the city's COVID-19 vaccination policy are no longer required to submit to weekly COVID-19 testing.
Before the requirement was lifted, some employees had refused to take COVID tests. They said testing was against their religion. 8 employees were fired for their refusals. Darling says the city can reinstate the COVID testing program at any time, and employees who are in the discipline process for refusing to test will continue in that process. What a moment today in Mexico, just an hour after a national earthquake drill, the real thing, struck in a major way. The good news is despite the size, a magnitude 7.6 according to the U.S. Geological Survey, there are no reports of major damage. The epicenter was a few miles from the coast in the state of Michoacan. Mexico City is hundreds of miles away, but offices were evacuated as a precaution. Today also marks the anniversaries of 2 major earthquakes in Mexico in 1985 and in 2017. A group of migrants locked up in Imperial County say they are being neglected medically, retaliated against, and being made to stay in solitary confinement. KPBS border reporter Gustavo Solis talked to one of the men who decided to speak out.
For 5 months, Donald Varela Fernandez told medical staff at the Imperial County Detention Center that he suffered from severe pain in his hips, back, shoulder, and joints. He says the pain got so bad that he needed a cane to help him walk.
I was in pain. It was agonizing to do anything and everything you normally need to do on a daily basis.
Instead of giving him treatment, Fernandez says that the medical staff at the detention center dismissed his complaints.
If you request medical help, all they do is just take you to the medical section, take your blood pressure, check your weight, and give you Tylenol and send you back to the dorm.
When Fernandez was finally taken to the hospital in El Centro, doctors told him he needed emergency spinal cord surgery. After the surgery, he says staff at the detention center took away instructions doctors had given him to follow as part of his recovery.
They took everything away and they sent me to a medical section to solitary 2 days there, and then they sent me to what they call Alpha, to solitary again for another 9 days.
Fernandez is one of several men in the detention center who filed a federal complaint last week against Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and MTC, the private company that operates the detention center. PJ Podesta is with the Innovation Law Lab, one of several organizations who filed the complaint.
We would like the oversight agencies to do a really thorough investigation, to not let the private contractors, not let ICE evade scrutiny.
Podesta says that what happened to Fernandez is not an isolated incident. He has heard similar stories from migrants in detention centers throughout California.
We see that it happens again and again and again, that folks are locked up in solitary or written up falsely. And even if we just take that set of folks, we see a clear pattern.
Migrants who speak out often face retaliation. Podesta says people like Fernandez are brave for telling their stories publicly.
What I find really inspiring and important is that people see the abuse, talk about the abuse, still speak out. They face retaliation for speaking out and still continue to speak out, still band together and speak out about it.
Fernandez says he decided to share his story to help other migrants in similar situations.
If no one talks about it, no one really knows what's going on.
ICE did not respond to questions about the complaint. MTC issued a statement saying the company is committed to following best practices. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
A dispute continues in El Cajon, with the city pushing back against a San Diego County program that gives hotel rooms to the homeless. As KPBS's Matt Hoffman reports, county officials say the move by El Cajon will only put more people on the streets.
They're intimidating private business owners, the owners of the hotels, who voluntarily choose to participate in this program. And they're intimidating the residents, and it's just a really unfortunate time.
Supervisor Nathan Fletcher says it's irresponsible for the city of El Cajon to try and limit the number of people in the county's hotel voucher program. He says 30% of the homeless residents have been connected to permanent housing. He's calling out El Cajon Mayor Bill Wells directly.
If this goes through, the only outcome of this will be hundreds of more homeless people in El Cajon and across East County. And that's a great disservice, not just to the unsheltered individuals. That's a disservice to every neighbor who's going to have these folks pushed back in their neighborhood.
Wells pushes back against that and believes the county is sending too many people from outside the city to their hotels, which he says then creates public safety issues.
I'm not working against anybody. I'm working for the people of El Cajon. People, they elected me because they want me to protect their interests. Anecdotally, we're hearing there's a lot of people from outside of the East County area. So I'd be curious to get real hard numbers on those statistics.
The county provided hard numbers, and they say 64% of the homeless in the voucher program are from El Cajon, with nearly 100% from the East County area.
They didn't have a problem with it over the last year. This program's over a year old, but only now do they have a problem.
Wells says they aren't kicking anyone out, despite telling hotels to reduce capacity and issuing them notices with potential fines for illegally operating as shelters.
We cited people for that, but frankly, we're working with people. I don't think we're going to end up finding anybody. They just have to comply with having less than 25%.
Wells says at least one of the hotels was nearly completely full, and he just wants more communication about what's happening. People using the vouchers say they are a lifesaver, especially those like local resident Dawn Disney, who is diabetic.
I have to take insulin now, and you have to keep it cold. It has to be in the refrigerator.
So you need them.
I can't be outside, so it's just frustrating. But why would you not want hotels to be helping homeless people?
Wells says he thinks a compromise can be found. County and El Cajon officials have another meeting to discuss the program later this week. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
Oceanside is among the latest batch of cities where excess state property might become affordable housing. A list issued today by Governor Gavin Newsom includes 5 sites. The Oceanside location involves a Caltrans property, and among those announced today, it's the closest to our area. The state has worked the past 3 years to identify locations that might be attractive to developers. More than a dozen new developments are now in the works. The UC San Diego School of Medicine has found that of many social and economic risk factors, housing insecurity was the one most strongly linked to death among cancer patients. KPBS iTech reporter Thomas Fudge has more.
The study examined more than 1,200 cancer patients. Among those who experienced social and financial difficulties, housing insecurity was the primary driver of mortality. Study co-author Matthew Benegas is director of the Center for Health Equity Education and Research at UC San Diego.
What this shows is that compared to people who do not have housing instability, those who do had about a 2-fold greater risk of mortality or death when we account for these other social factors, as well as other patient demographic and clinical characteristics.
The other risk factors considered were financial hardship, food insecurity, and transportation problems. Bonega said the study did not answer the question of why housing instability was most likely to lead to death among cancer patients, but he said having inadequate housing is a multifaceted problem.
So, for example, is it the fact that, again, they don't have a stable shelter over their head, or is it that they don't have consistent utility in their house, right? So again, there's several things that could go into being housing unstable.
The influence of social risk factors on health are not always considered by medical prescriptions. Bonega says, for instance, it's not practical to prescribe the use of a medical device if there's no place at home to plug it in.
Social risk factors reflect circumstances that are influenced by where we live, where we work, right? Where we just interact on a daily life. We know that all of those conditions are going to impact us as individuals and the way that we encounter life on a day-to-day basis. And so I think it makes sense for us to say, hey, it's very likely that these risk factors, social risk factors, also influence our health.
He said the study was one way to point that out. Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
President Joe Biden is on his way back to the U.S. after attending the funeral for Queen Elizabeth II in London. Isabel Rosales reports on the farewell to the United Kingdom's longest-serving monarch.
A somber day for the United Kingdom as the world says goodbye to a queen whose reign spanned more than 7 decades, the longest reigning monarch in British history.
The grief of this day, felt not only by the late Queen's family, but all round the nation, the Commonwealth and the world, arises from her abundant life and loving service, now gone from us.
Westminster Abbey's tenor bell chiming once a minute for 96 minutes, marking each year of Queen Elizabeth II's life. Roughly 2,000 people attended, including world leaders like President Joe Biden, First Lady Jill Biden, and members of the royal family. Following the service, thousands of people lined the streets of London as the Queen's coffin passed Buckingham Palace for the final time.
We adore her, and that's why we are here, because we are part of the Commonwealth.
The crowds cheering as her coffin left London. The Queen laid to rest in Windsor Castle, near her husband of 73 years, Prince Philip. In London, Isabel Rosales, KPBS News.
And it has been quite a week as the world said goodbye to Queen Elizabeth. Our coverage includes a personal story from KPBS reporter John Carroll, who was there when his father led a service attended by the Queen here in San Diego. And you can stream that story on the KPBS YouTube page. The Navy arson trial related to the 2020 fire on board the USS Bonhomme Richard is underway. Seaman apprentice Ryan Sawyer Mays is charged with arson and endangering a ship. Prosecutors claim Mays was a disgruntled sailor who washed out of SEAL basic training after 2 days. Defense lawyers question whether the government's arson case can be proven and point to other unsolved ship fires, including one on the USS Essex that same morning. Another fire was found on the Bonhomme Richard a month earlier. It's one of San Diego's big moneymakers. Cruise season is officially here with the first ship arriving this morning. The Port of San Diego expects 500,000 passengers in the coming months. That's up 45% from last year, and it's expected to be the busiest season since well before the pandemic. Vaccine requirements vary by cruise line. One couple from South Carolina says they plan to make another trip to San Diego.
Tired of being housebound, basically, so we were ready.
We're coming back in February or March and making plans now so that we can actually get the tickets and book the tours.
And if you're down by the waterfront, you can expect to see a cruise ship every few days. The season runs through May, and San Diego is expecting more than 100 different cruises to pass through. California is poised to add millions of electric cars to roads in the next decade, but is there enough electricity to fuel them? KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson looks at whether the grid can handle the load.
The gentle hum of electric vehicles could soon overtake the rumble of internal combustion engines in California. Clean air regulators say all new cars sold in the state will be electric or zero emissions by 2035. But California's relationship with the power grid is fraught with uncertainty, a fact highlighted by a late summer heat wave.
Between now and next Wednesday, we're going to be experiencing a prolonged heat moment.
Governor Gavin Newsom's calls for conservation were answered, and the threat of rolling blackouts was averted. But Newsom was roasted on social media after power grid officials asked residents not to charge their EVs during the evening. That came just a week after the state announced the 2035 ban on the sale of new cars with internal combustion engines. Still, California remains committed to shrinking its carbon footprint as a way to avoid more intense wildfires and drought, hallmarks of climate change.
That we need to eliminate emissions from the California economy.
David Victor is an energy policy researcher at UC San Diego.
Biggest source of emissions right now in California, 41% of emissions come from transportation. So you got to tackle that. And the leading solution, not the only solution, but the leading solution is electrifying, especially electrifying cars.
Victor says no one wants the electric grid to become less reliable, and he says there's time for the state to absorb the coming demand. He says EVs are arriving in the midst of an energy transition. Solar and wind are rising in prominence, but that also calls for more energy storage capacity. And the grid will have to be built up to account for the extra draw from EVs.
Pretty much every study shows there's going to be a significant increase in the demand for electricity in California as a result of this. I think many of the studies suggest that light-duty vehicles alone, so cars, that they are going to be responsible for maybe a 1/4 increase in the demand for electricity between now and 2045.
And while millions of new EVs will be feeding off the electric grid in coming years, the change isn't immediate. San Diego Gas and Electric representatives say they can handle the demand for more power as more EVs hit the road.
The short answer to that is yes.
Jenny Reynolds is San Diego Gas and Electric's Director of Clean Transportation.
The long answer is much more complicated. And so when you start getting into the specifics of when that load's going to hit, how it's going to hit, what new technology and what type of battery storage we have to help, that's a much more complex answer.
Reynolds says the utility can build the required power lines and transformers. That's what utilities do. But the company also needs to build understanding among its EV customers. Right now, energy usage peaks between 4 and 9 p.m. The utility wants EV charging to happen during the day or overnight.
If we can get a lot of that charging in those times, then the build out isn't going to be as much. So we have capacity that's there. It's about how do we incentivize customers to use that capacity. Then it's also the new technology like vehicle to grid and how we as consumers are going to be able to own our energy transition.
Vehicle to grid is an emerging technology being tested in the Cajon Valley School District. Electric buses can feed power in their batteries back to the grid for a premium price when electricity is in short supply. EVs, in essence, could become a huge reservoir of stored energy. But UC San Diego's Jan Kleisel says that tech isn't quite ready yet.
So the devil really is in the details of the inverter technology not becoming too expensive to then make it not worth the customer's while. And the battery manufacturer, meaning in this case the vehicle manufacturer, agreeing that this is something that they will cover under warranty.
Kleisel says developing ways to manage the power demand from millions of household devices and EVs will keep the grid reliable.
Computing systems can help us to manage things better in time, like scheduling, but still, you don't make the load go away, you just shift it.
Shifting the load, shifting people's habits, and shifting the power supply to renewables while adding capacity to the grid are keys to making sure the flood of EVs don't swamp a power grid that's already feeling its limitations. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
The demand for lithium is surging as battery-powered cars become the future, and our region could play a part in extracting it. San Diego-based Energy Source Minerals is developing a lithium mine near the Salton Sea. Company president Eric Spomer says extracting lithium from underground brine water is an effective secondary use of geothermal plants in Imperial County, and the region will likely become a major source of the metal.
So I think it's coming. I think it will happen. I think we are going to prove it, and we would be happy to help others cause the Salton Sea to be developed as a power resource and a huge lithium resource.
Spomer says he expects his company's facility will ultimately mine 20,000 tons of lithium per year. The U.S. territory of Puerto Rico is dealing with yet another major hurricane 5 years into the week Hurricane Maria hit the island. As Mike Valerio reports, this storm is less severe, but still doing plenty of damage.
After the fury of Fiona, more than 1,000 rescues across Puerto Rico, nearly 5 years to the day after Hurricane Maria took aim at the island, knocking out Puerto Rico's power grid. In some instances now, officials say, the flooding may be worse. Puerto Rico's governor, Pedro Pierluisi, said, quote, the entire island was affected by heavy rain, and perhaps for that very reason, people can say this time the floods are worse than Maria. Carlos Vega took this video outside his home in Hormigueros. The floodwaters are near the Guanajibo River, which is at an all-time record height of nearly 30 feet. Help is coming from the mainland. New York sending Spanish-speaking police officers.
We'll have over 100 troopers from the New York State Police Department on their way to Puerto Rico over this next week. And as the need continues to rise, we'll be ready to offer other resources and support.
Fiona delivered an island-wide blackout. By early Monday, more than 1 million people in Puerto Rico were still without power. In eastern portions of the Dominican Republic, forecasters say life-threatening flash and urban flooding is likely through early Tuesday. Fiona is expected to strengthen in the coming days, nearing Bermuda by the end of the week. The National Hurricane Center calls for Fiona to reach Category 3 by Wednesday, making it the first major hurricane of the year in the Atlantic. Mike Valerio, KPBS News.
Well, we're dealing with some pretty comfortable weather overall for us here in Southern California. We'll turn a little warmer on Tuesday, but there are some patchy coastal clouds in the morning. Nothing too far from the norm, really, for this time of the year. There is a big deviation from what's typical for September in other parts of California, though, with our California storm staying north. Central California, Northern California getting some rain and a little hint of some late Summer snow, mainly way up above 9,000 or 10,000 feet up into the Sierra. But it's good to see some of that, and it's good to see some of our friends to the north getting a little drought relief. Remember, we saw a lot of rain from Kay about a week and a half ago. They didn't see that to the north, so maybe it's their turn, perhaps. Snow levels around 9,500 feet. Overnight for us, partly cloudy, 66 degrees. Kind of a tame, quiet night for us. Interior areas, Campo, 52. It's a cool spot. Borrego Springs on the other end of the spectrum at 67 degrees, and the low clouds are going to be lurking early in the morning. But as time progresses deeper into Tuesday afternoon, the sun returns and we're looking good and quiet. And you'll notice the persistent daytime clouds stay farther north, and we're going to be dealing with dry weather locally. Temperatures low 80s for some in Ramona, Escondido, El Cajon 86, Borrego Springs 97, double digits as opposed to triple digits, and then for the coastline upper 70s. A little bit warmer out there, but you have to get farther east for the true heat. And there are the showers Tuesday as our Pacific storm begins to kind of lift north, and Wednesday not as warm as Tuesday will have been. But as we take a look at that coastal forecast here, a good deal of sun, a little breezy out there on Wednesday. We have to keep an eye on any fire danger. Just whenever we're dry and we get a breeze, we have to keep an eye on that. Upper 80s return to the inland areas by the weekend. Mountainous areas, a warming trend into the 80s by the end of the week. And then for the deserts, here we spike back at around 101 degrees on Saturday. So summer weather and the heat is not fully over quite yet. I'm meteorologist Jeff Cornish for KPBS News.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, Puerto Rico is slammed by another devastating storm nearly 5 years to the day after Hurricane Maria. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley. And by the following: and by viewers like you. Thank you.